Inescapable truth number one is that you will trigger each other. You could say you will piss each other off.
Oh man, why do we have to trigger each other?
Hello and welcome to the Empower Couples Podcast, where here you get modern, non-boring relationship advice for you and your partner to communicate like pros, fight smarter, and stay in the same team no matter the challenge that you face. I am one of your hosts, Aaron Freeman.
And I'm Jocelyn Freeman, but you all just know us as the Freemans.
And this episode is about 3 inescapable truths about marriage that lead to either more happy or hard days.
Now, Aaron, isn't it true that it's not all happiness, right? In marriage, of course, we want an overall happy, fulfilling, connected, healthy partnership, but we're going to have hard days. We had a hard day yesterday, right? Like with life, as you become busier and things are more complex and you have more responsibility and you're together for years and years, we have to be equipped to navigate the hard moments. You hear us talk a lot about that on the podcast, but I just think that in today's world, you can see content and it's all about the exciting parts of a partnership, right? Travel and having a baby and getting a home and all these celebrations, our anniversaries. And what we want to make sure you don't feel alone in knowing that there are things that can feel challenging in a partnership. And so I think today's inescapable truths will really resonate. And they're reminders that we all need to hear at times to know that there's not something wrong with our partnership just because we encounter these inescapable truths that we're going to go into.
Well, and actually, I spoke at an event last night and did talk about love accounts. And I was reminded, I will say I did put a nice slide up there, a nice quote about your feeling of love and connection can't be circumstantial. It can't be based on circumstances going well or not because of what you're saying. Days are going to be hard. You're going to do a few things to each other that we're going to talk about here today. And you're going to have challenges. And that's a part of life. It's a part of the growth. So you can become the person that you were meant to become. And your love account has to be about effort, not about whether circumstances are just going well or not.
Woo! Can you say that one again?
Your love account, which, does play into what we're talking about today. Your love account has to be based on effort in deposits, and also effort to reduce withdrawals, if you've been following us. And it can't just be based on circumstances being good.
Because honestly, if we just let that be dictated by circumstances, there would have been so many times in the last year and a half where we would have let our marriage and our partnership really decline. Because you've heard us refer to our last year and a half on the podcast. Even again, this week has been a quote unquote harder week for different circumstances, different things going on with family, other things that we have going on in our lives. So you're exactly right. It can't be just dictated by circumstances. It's that effort. It's like, what are we really committed to? So yeah, with that said.
Well, let's jump to the first one then. The inescapable truth number one is that you will trigger each other. You could say you will piss each other off.
Oh man, why do we have to trigger each other?
And again, if you follow us for a while, each one of these, principles we could take even further. So we won't take too much time here, but what we mean by trigger each other does have kind of multiple steps to it. Trigger each other means your partner's going to do and say some things that trigger the emotion or the core fear in you. And right now, most of you are probably going to let that triggered emotion then run your reaction. So a lot of times when people say, oh, I was triggered, it's like, oh, were you talking about your emotion got elicited and you were accepting of it and you still acted from commitment, not from the triggered fear? Because that's different than you get triggered emotion and then you immediately react to how you feel. That usually causes more damage to your partner.
Right.
So what do we mean by this? Well, both. So we do mean that you'll do and say some things to each other that will both trigger the emotion or the fear. And there will be times where you don't catch yourself and you allow for the automatic pattern or the trigger behavior to just run and you'll do some more maybe unnecessary damage or hurt than would have been necessary.
Which is why you need to always repair, which we're not going to go into repair. You hear us talk about that a lot on podcast episodes, so refer to those. So we're not saying do damage to each other, but just blame it on the triggers and don't repair, right?
For sure, yeah.
You know the two big goals with conflict are learn to de-escalate faster and learn to repair faster. But I want to talk about for a moment, why do we have to trigger each other? Because we say that even to couples on sessions, we'll kind of make light of the fact that even when you find your person and you think, okay, this is the person I'm going to build a life with, I want to have children with them, you start a family, you merge finances, you're creating a life, why do we then have to trigger each other? And really, that intimate relationship can hit sensitive spots that other people can't, because you reveal everything to each other. And with intimacy comes vulnerability. And with vulnerability comes the potential to be triggered by that person, that, you know each other's triggers and wounds. And
I would even say, it's funny you mentioned like comes with vulnerability. Some try to resist that though.
Yes.
So you have to bring about this acknowledgement of your fear and when it shows up and where it comes from. My speech yesterday, I actually talked about it was crazy. I have to say this. No one knew what it was called, but it's the paper finger game for kids. Yeah. And I did a much worse job describing it. Basically, I'm standing on stage and I didn't think through that I was going to say this story. So I'm like, I literally just did this with my fingers and everyone in the room knew exactly what I was talking about, to the point where at the end of the speech, a woman came up and she had made one during the talk and gave it to me. Yes. And so...
Did they tell you the name of it?
No one knew.
Okay, but we all know what it is.
And they were, the age was probably a little bit older, so I was surprised that even that was something that everyone remembered. But it's that vulnerability piece, right? It's that comes with being in a relationship. You have core needs, you have fears, and those come from places, sometimes from your relationship, sometimes outside. That's why I brought up the finger game, because I said in 5th grade, I remember girls in my class playing that game, which had like the names of the boys that they liked, like the car they wanted to drive and the house they would live in, right? And so you would be like, oh, I landed on Jimmy with a Corvette and we live in a van down by the river, right? So it's kind of like that. But I was never a name in one of those.
How did that make you feel?
Well, that no one wanted me. And so that came through. I mean, you and I started to get together and that was still there, right? So you don't really get to say what fear and emotion, what circumstances happen in your life and like what you make that mean and how that becomes like a wound of yours. So that's coming with you. And so you better be open to vulnerability. And when it comes up, being honest with yourself, let alone being able to be honest with your partner. Yeah. And that's going to take vulnerability. That's where connection is. I think a lot of people will try to get around that, but your relationship's going to be limited in its connection.
Thanks for sharing that story. And I think the main point we hope you all will take away from this first inescapable truth, that you will trigger each other, you will quote unquote piss each other off, is that you have to then be vulnerable instead, and sometimes you can trigger each other more when you're stressed, you're overwhelmed. I mean, this week, I feel like there's 10 things I need to accomplish all at once. And so I'm quote unquote more triggerable, right? But I have to, number one, take ownership for the overwhelm I'm feeling, express to you what I need, which is what we did last night, being more vulnerable with each other. So you can't just keep trying to survive life, keep triggering each other and avoid it. You got to sit down, be vulnerable with yourself and each other.
I feel like we did level 1. Just want to say that. It's probably another level for us to go to. Okay. As far as I know.
Take me there.
Not right now. This will be at another time. But the main takeaway, that's going to happen. You're going to trigger each other both in emotion and you're going to react. But the main takeaway is you really do have a say. So start to identify when you have the feeling and don't just react. Don't just act from the feeling. And there are different ways to self-regulate and downregulate that emotion to disconnect that tie. So why don't you take us into the second inescapable truth?
Yes. So the second inescapable truth in marriage that will lead to either more happy days or hard days is that you will disagree on both big and small decisions. if you think about life together, we've been together a decade now. We plan on many more decades together, right? There are a lot of crossroads that you're going to reach. There's a lot of decisions, small, big, and there are times that you won't agree. Like, we don't immediately agree with each other right away. And we were talking to a couple yesterday on the session where they were saying, I feel like we disagree on pretty much fundamentally everything. And of course, we could really provide you like a whole framework for the way we approach decisions. But here's the first key you have to get is that you can't be pit against each other because you disagree. It can't become a battle because you go to, let's say you're trying to decide something for your children, right? A choice that you have to make with them. If you immediately see the other person as someone you have to convince and overthrow their power to then have them succumb to what you believe, the conversation will feel like a battle rather than exploring and brainstorming. And so one of the things we say to couples is slow down. Slow down the conversations. Don't try to convince each other within 3 to 5 minutes. Especially if it is a bigger decision, slow down the conversation. Even if you need to choose a different time to have it because you're trying to squeeze it into doing 10 other things, getting ready for the day. And when you slow down, you can actually give each other a chance to elaborate further. Provide more context as to why you think this is a good decision or why you think this factor needs to be included. And by understanding more of that context from each other, what we believe ultimately, and I want to hear more what you think, is when you can ultimately then get to a place where there's a win-win agreement, that you can include both of your perspectives somehow, some way in most decisions. If you understand the context, you understand the value behind why they think that's the right decision.
Likely the best decision forward is not going to be one of your decisions. Mm-hmm. It's probably going to be a combination of the two of your decisions coming together with pieces of other ideas you didn't think of until you had a very open, collaborative conversation.
Right.
So my idea about something, again, isn't like, that's not the only possibility here. And so I think just to think that my path is not only the only path, but the first one I thought of is the right one, and this is the right way for us to go for the long term. Mm-hmm. It's like, I mean, what information am I really basing that off of? Yeah. Like where you want to live, for example. Well, I could have some ideas, but just being open to bringing that to the table with each other and exploring how each of your needs fit into that, exploring as far as you can about the impact of whether it's schooling, whether it's nature, whether it's whatever social pursuit or business pursuit, whatever the professional landscape is like, what the housing market is like, all that also changes. It could change in the 3 years that you move there. So just use that as an example. You know, we chose to move to Charlotte. We went from Scottsdale, Arizona to Charlotte, North Carolina, back to Phoenix, Arizona, down to Gilbert. And I realized we have lived 7 different places together.
Yeah.
Most of those were in the Scottsdale, Phoenix area. So we really only did that one move to Charlotte. But how we came to that, it wasn't just, I said, hey, here's where I want to live, and that's the only place. And then we fought about it. You had some other ideas. We looked at the whole landscape. Yep. And we did that. What type of family environment's going to be, where we want to go, what places meet that, what about the nature,
economies.
Yeah.
And we also talked to other people. And so I love that you bring that up because so one thing I notice with people, and I hear it come out of people's mouths, is, well, this is what I think we should do because this is how I was raised. And in a marriage, that can really create conflict because especially if you had 2 totally different upbringings like we did, then are you just going to keep battling because you're trying to convince each other that the other person's upbringing wasn't the right way? And here's the other thing I think is important to consider. What if modeling after how you were brought up and how your family handled things isn't actually the best or the most productive or efficient or healthy? So at least our mindset with decision making is that we research things, especially with the hot topics. I think with couples, I think 2 big ones are money and kids. Of course, there are others, but those 2 especially, I just think that it's not wise to just refer to your upbringing, especially if that conflicts with your partners. Instead, become researchers, learn together, try to acquire information from experts, challenge your perspective, challenge your beliefs. And then ultimately you two can create a better solution, a better decision that comes from being informed rather than just defaulting to your upbringing.
Mm-hmm. Let's move to the third inescapable truth. And that is you will feel that your needs conflict at times.
Yes.
And it's not true. And I know that's going to be hard to get at surface level. And in a sense, if you're only thinking of it as surface level, then it probably will seem as if they are conflicting needs. For example, and I'm trying to remember the one from the speech yesterday, a couple was talking about his like a need for feeling prioritized and time together versus a seeming need for alone time, individual time, or let's say time to focus on like business and work activities. So a couple that we had talked to, that's the issue that they were having. He was working long hours and she felt that she wasn't being prioritized, nor the family, and they had 2 kids. And so they weren't discussing that level of need. She was just saying, well, why are you still working? I know you work a lot. It's been so many hours. Like, when are you going to have time for us? And so immediately they just got into a back and forth, like an argument. Well, don't you know what I'm doing I'm doing all this work for you and the family. So why don't you appreciate what I'm doing? Where she is saying, well, I don't feel prioritized. So it seems like those needs are conflicting. But they're not really talking about the needs. They're talking about the level of upset, the level of hurt. And so, likely you have to take your upset and take it deep enough to understand what is the underlying need here that seems to be causing this conflict. Okay, for her, it is feeling prioritized and having time with the family. For him is to make sure he can provide the safety and security for the family ongoingly.
Yeah.
So now it's just about timing.
Yes.
And so a lot of times I think we get tripped up on, well, here's my need and here's your need. And then in this moment, they are conflicting. Well, they don't both have to happen right now. And so if you can acknowledge what the underlying need is, number one, I think that's just a big benefit. Oh, yeah. Hey, I get why you're upset. I know I've been working a lot this week and
you have to validate each other's needs.
Yeah, I could totally see how you're not feeling prioritized. I do have to finish work today and, maybe tomorrow I have already things scheduled, but I know that's a big need for you. So the following day, I'm going to take off the whole morning and we're going to go to the park together or something. I
think that's so key what you're saying about really acknowledging the needs. And I want to elaborate on what you said about the timing, because you're right. In this very moment today, we can't meet time together and alone time in this very moment. So people broadening their perspective to a larger time frame. Okay, this week, how can we fulfill all of our needs? And getting more solution oriented and creative. And that's why time blocking can be so helpful, right? Because if I know we're going to get quality time on Saturday because we're going to go on a date together, then all week I will be able to look forward to that. And then if you know that you're going to get some alone time, you're going to be able to go on a hike, for example, on Sunday, then you know that's coming up. And so I think that if couples using our family meeting structure, by the way, which is just a must for everyone to implement, we love getting messages from everyone using our family meeting guide because that allows you to sit down or go on a walk, get creative, have a conversation about these needs, and then prioritize them and be able to see how you can fit it in the broader picture of a week or a month and be able to, create that time, because it really is about getting solution oriented with time. We all have only so many hours in a day, in a week, but you can't keep denying each other's needs because you're busy and I need this and I need this. That's just, to me, a lack of getting creative and time blocking together.
So to summarize this last point, you're going to have conflicts come up and just recognize that. Recognize that, oh, this is probably from a need, unmet need of mine and one from my partner. So they seem to be conflicting right now.
Yeah.
Just broaden the perspective, check the time out, and then you want to bounce back. So if you need to repair something, repair it. Then if you're in a season where you're in a low love account, then add some deposits, and now you're back. Until the next time, right? And then so you can just get better at acknowledging that, trying to get faster to the need, broaden your time horizon a lot faster, and then maybe you don't have to repair it all. Drop a couple of deposits in the love account, and you're off and running.
Drop a couple deposits, which actually that's a good reminder that to create more happy days together and be able to navigate these inescapable truths as a team, that is what the 30-Day Couples Challenge helps support, right? Because exactly that, the love account, focusing on more deposits, less withdrawals, because it is the buildup of the small daily things. If you think about momentum and how you can either create positive momentum or negative, where you see a couple spiraling down, it's getting worse, it's feeling harder. We created the 30-Day Couples Challenge to create positive momentum through those small things. So we have our next challenge starting within a few days of hearing this episode. So go to mycoupleschallenge.com, join the thousands of couples around the world, which, by the way, you're not in like a public forum. You're not having to, air your story or have to be accountable to anyone online. You're participating in the challenge privately. It's sent right to your device. So go to mycoupleschallenge.com and read the testimonials and see why couples love this and how it creates that positive momentum, so that regardless of these 3 inescapable truths, you can have more happy days and navigate those hard days. So any final notes of inspiration from you?
No.
Okay, so with that, we are grateful for you all. Thank you for listening. If you're new here, make sure you hit subscribe, and it would mean so much if you would give us 5 stars on whichever platform that you're listening on. I love recording with you, Aaron, and we will talk to you on the next episode.